Welcome to the T2 Hubcast. Join T2 and guests as they discuss all things personal and professional development. The T2 Hubcast, brought to you by the People Performance People.
Hello and welcome to the T2 Hubcast with me, Tracy Roberts.
And me, Lydia English.
Ooh, we've got a special guest today.
Oh
How
my
exciting.
goodness.
Are you excited to be here?
Yeah.
Because you were like, I do love a chat, but I'm not sure if I want to do a podcast yet.
Yeah, I've done a couple because Martin forced me into it, but I thought.
Well, this was a juicy subject, wasn't it? That's why we decided to get you in on this one. So what we're going to talk about today is something that's very much trending in terms of conversation pieces from, a lot of the people that we work with, but also through HR professionals and people like that. And we're going to talk about quiet quitting. Which sounds a bit scary, actually, doesn't it?
A little bit, yeah.
And there's certainly nothing quiet about me.
No.
And I don't think I'd ever be able to quiet quit. But it was a good conversation piece. We're having a good conversation about it in the office, so we decided that we'd have a little look at it. So yeah, let's first look at what it is, because I suppose people might be interested in hearing a little bit more about it. I suppose really for a lot of people, it will be dependent on the situation in terms of how it's seen. It's more about people, I guess, subconsciously, maybe a little bit consciously, kind of rejecting the hustle culture a bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about them saying, I am going to do what's required of me in my job, but no more than that.
Yeah, the bare minimum.
The bare minimum, sometimes even drawing back a little bit to beyond that bare minimum, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Rather than really focusing on what takes you to the next level. Now, some people take this to a very big degree, don't they? So they'll say, no, it's almost equivalent to, we should point out that it's similar to the work to rule sort of focus that was around, a long time ago, where it was more linked with industrial action, actually, wasn't it? About taking productivity down. And it's not as sort of distinct as that, but the reality is it'll kind of come out differently in different people. So some people will be, right, I will actually halt my extra effort that goes in, if you like, to bring this company to the next level. And for some people, it's more about, like you say, just my working hours are 9 to 5. I will arrive at 5 to 9 and I will leave at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
And we do hear a lot about the hustle culture, don't we? About people feeling like if they don't go above and beyond, and if they don't do extra, and if they don't justify their own existence, I think it's probably the... Yeah. Have you ever kind of been in an environment like that where it does feel a little bit like if you don't go that extra mile, it looks bad on you?
Not personally, no, but I know a lot of people do experience that, and it's in some workplaces it's recognized, isn't it, where the people who stay an hour after finishing time are the hard workers, like, oh, they must be working really, really hard.
Yeah.
When actually it could be down to other reasons. They may be under a lot of pressure from somebody higher than them. It could be that they don't actually have a team around them to support them, so they're having to stay late in order to catch up on the workload. Or it could be something completely different, something going on at home. Or
they don't want to go home. There's a lot of stress. The other thing it might be is, some people don't want to admit that they're not coping, like you say, with their actual workload itself.
Yeah.
So actually they hang back to get that quiet time sometimes.
Yes.
And there are a lot of us out there also that, we maybe don't do it to be seen as we do the extra work. Our way is just early is good. So for me, because I come from a military background, I'm an hour early for most things, which is highly annoying to other people. And they probably would look at me and go, why does she put that extra, or why does she stay late, or why does she do that thing on a Sunday to prepare herself for the Monday?
Yeah.
That's just my mindset. So I don't do it because I feel like I have to do it. I feel like for my own mental health, to be organised and to have a calm moment to prepare myself.
Yeah,
that's
ready
what
for the
I
working
do.
day.
But I think you're right. I think a lot of people, it's for a multitude of reasons, but there are other people out there who do it to be observed.
Yes.
And they're the ones that jump up and down and say, look at me. And because of even things like certain elements of bias in a workplace, if I'm seen to be the one that puts the extra hours in, or if I'm seen to be the one who gets in early with the boss or whatever it might be, then I'll be next in line for whatever opportunity comes up.
Yeah.
But for some people, it like I say, it's just organisation, isn't it? But I guess the difference now is, and I think this is maybe why it's maybe reared its head again a little bit, is people's perceptions have changed since the pandemic, haven't they?
Yeah, definitely. People are valuing work-life balance more, aren't they? They're, you know, if they maybe lost a loved one during lockdown, it's a perspective of life's too short.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna make the most of life. You know, I'm contracted to work 9 till 5, so I will finish at 5 o'clock, go straight home and spend it with my family. And personally, I think, rightly so.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think a lot of people think that during the pandemic, people who were working from home might have had a little bit of an easy ride of it, thinking, you had your fun now, like, let's go back to the office. But I think, talking from personal experience in the pandemic, it did make me check myself a bit. But what I realized was that I thought, oh, well, this will be great. I'll get a balance here. I'll be able to spend a bit of time with my family, but I'll be able to really work hard because I don't have the traveling. I was doing so much traveling before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And actually, I found it went the opposite way. I had to really, really check myself at a certain point because we're trying to pivot a business to go online, much like we were here at T2.
Yeah.
It was every hour, and I was grabbing food and going back to my desk. And I had a little girl trying to learn schooling at home. That was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare, to be honest. And I felt like really bad some days because I realized I hadn't really had the time to sit with her. So it did make me reassess. And I was made redundant during COVID after doing all that extra work. So it really made me realize that actually, I'm not saying every business is like this, but you've got to put it into perspective sometimes. The effort you put in, is it actually going to be measured in that way that, well, that person did add all this value, therefore they're, we can't do without them. We're always going to look after them, because the reality is finances are finances. Changes in the business are changes in the business. So I don't think anyone's ever safe. No. So actually the mindset that if I'm seen a lot sometimes doesn't wash. I mean, I put as many hours in as I wanted to put in and made big changes to a business, but the reality was those rules still had to go. So I then realized during COVID that because I'm someone who's deeply connected with my purpose, I have to have, can't just go to work and process. That's not me. I need to understand where the business is going, what my cog turns and all the rest of it. I think I can kind of see where people are going with this whole scenario, because I feel like if you're not feeling that you're getting something back from it, you're going to disconnect, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly.
How would you say that you're a bit like that? If you don't understand the benefits of what you're doing, that you disconnect from that? Or
yeah, definitely. When I've been in previous roles before, which I've maybe not necessarily enjoyed, I was very much of the opinion of, right, I start at this time, I get an hour lunch, which I don't get paid for.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I had a scenario like that actually. Yeah.
And I finish at this time, so I'm leaving at that time. But I think it depends. I mean, for me, it's how much you enjoy your job.
I think you're absolutely right.
I mean, here at C2, I love my job.
Yeah.
And so
we have to say that because Martin's listening.
Yeah, exactly.
We're only joking.
So starting 10 minutes earlier, if I get to the office for 7:45, I don't mind switching on my computer and catching up on emails.
Yeah.
Or if I'm in the middle of doing something and it gets to 4 o'clock when we finish, I don't mind staying an extra half an hour to finish off that job.
Yeah.
So I think it's really how connected you feel with the organization as well. It's like you don't mind doing it.
Yeah. I would say it's like, because it feels like your choice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you don't feel like you're having to impress anyone particularly. You're doing a good job. So I know you're someone you really care about, being good at your job. That's important to you. But you don't do it in such a way where you kind of throw things in people's face. Look what I'm doing. And we've all worked with that person, haven't we? Yeah. It's just bloody annoying. But I always think that if you're good at what you do and you love what you do, you don't need to do that because people see it.
Yeah.
It's almost like people tap you on the shoulder sometimes. They go, wow, you're phenomenal. Or, ooh, I'm going to put you up for promotion, and you sort of a little bit, oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Because the reality is people just feel it from you. And that's because you are deeply connected to the humans in the organization, but also really anchored to the purpose behind what you're doing.
Yeah.
And if you're anchored to it, then it's really hard to become, disengaged from that, isn't it? But there's got to be something big that changes in your life or the organization that unanchors you, sort of thing.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of the reasons that things are maybe not feeling as in intense for people in that sense now is maybe it's because the destabilization of the environment that we're in. So we're not guaranteed that we're going to have a job.
Well, yeah.
We've seen that people have lost their jobs and obviously had to make big decisions. Cost of living's going up.
Yeah.
So if your business is not able to, fall in line with that a little bit, offer you the increase that you feel like you need and things like that, that can disconnect you without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then things like, the fact that you've got a little bit less structure sometimes as well, like that can feel a little bit difficult. So, I talk to a lot of people and I've got personal experience of having a child and how difficult it is to balance up your life. So it changes as they get older. So as they're younger, it's like they go into nursery and you feel guilty and it's cost an absolute arm and a leg. So the parents out there will know exactly where I'm going. You basically take one pay packet and pay it straight to the nursery. And then as they get older, it's like pick up and drop off times at school. And then as they get older again, I want to be around a bit because they're changing as a human and I want to support them.
Yeah.
And then if you're in a situation where in and out of COVID, it's been all over, you've had the balance, then you've not had the balance. And then your business has said, work hybrid, and you've gone, brilliant, this is great. And then all of a sudden they go, no, I want you back in the office. But I've got to point out that I think that some businesses aren't doing the back in the office bit for a negative reason.
No.
I think some of them are doing it because they've realized that the affinity distance, I always say this with people, has got bigger. So although you can do the job like at a distance, and then obviously that satisfies a lot of people's requirements from work and stops all this stuff. I think that sometimes it's if the person feels like they're being drawn back in because there's a lack of trust. So going back to where we were before COVID almost, well, I want to know what you're doing, and I think that's another reason why people top load their diaries. So they go in every day. I used to work with people that would say to me, I stick meetings in my diary, even if I know I'm not going to go to those meetings.
Right. So it looks like you're busy.
Yeah. And then, and I've worked with people that I've caught them out doing that, not in a negative way, but I've gone, well, why did you just tell me that you're doing prep? It doesn't, and a lot of people, they'll think they're being observed as busy and productive by doing that. But the reality is it doesn't really work like that, because you could be a busy fool. That's what I call it. Someone who's doing all these calls, having all these conversations, but actually what are you generating from that?
Whereas if you took productive.
Like think of when you were doing the bits that you were doing, sometimes you just go quiet. Not very often, I have to say, but you are very quiet. And I know you're creating. You're concentrating, you're pulling data out. And I'm the same. I have to actually say to you, look, if I go out there and I'm quiet, don't worry about me, because you do worry when I'm quiet.
Yes, it's very weird.
Yeah, it's strange. But it's that feeling, isn't it, of having the control of that and knowing when to use the time that you have. So I think that reduces your chances of quiet quitting, because you're getting a bit of a balance there. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, exactly. So it's not with me. So when I'm doing research and stuff, I sometimes find I feel like I'm not being productive because I'm not producing like a pathway or a blog or a piece of content. But actually, I'm taking that time to collect my thoughts, get new ideas. And so in a way, I'm being productive that way. I'm just kind of not producing anything.
Yeah. But it is weird, isn't it? Because we do think about things like that. Like we always talk about our quadrants and what's important and what's urgent and what's not urgent. And we kind of try and educate people that we work with on that, don't we? But they always put things in the wrong box, I think. So like you were saying there, the fact you're reading and taking things in, like that is massively productive, because you're processing it in your brain. And you're really good at taking really like difficult stuff and making it seem easy. But the only way you get there is to take that time. So that is productive. So if you were working in an organization that expected you to diarize every minute of your day, and you felt like you were putting stuff like that in the diary a lot, and you'd probably be going, oh, what are they going to think of me just thinking in that period? You just put thinking time. People will be like, well, so I can kind of get why that people, if they're in a creative role or whatever, might even be more at risk of something like this, because they'll be thinking, they're being micromanaged. And psychologically, if you feel like someone's not giving you something, you don't necessarily want to give it back. So if employer's giving you that vibe, that's where the psychological,
you almost start to rebel a little bit.
Of course you do. And I think I can definitely state there's some situations where I've been like that, where I haven't been essentially quite quitting, but I've been very close to it, because I have realized I've had things like, from a productivity perspective, I've had a boss that's micromanaged me to within 1 inch of my life 1 week. And then the following week, because he's so inconsistent, doesn't call me at all. And then is back on me, you know, and with that inconsistency, I'll then land the great stuff in his inbox and doesn't even read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the next week is, you know, so that's the sort of stuff that's disconnected me. I thought, hang on a minute, you're not even letting me know how I'm performing. Yeah. You're not giving me feedback. All you're doing is literally, when you can be bothered, you're coming in and harassing me, probably because someone's asked you, what's your team doing? And you don't know.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that really, in terms of like how it kind of pans out, it's down to that level of trust in the organization. Culture is massive, isn't it?
Definitely.
Because sometimes the job's not even always enjoyable. It's just the people you work with make it not bearable, but you enjoy it more because of the people around you.
Oh, exactly. That's a really big thing for me. If I don't like the people I'm working with, you're not going to enjoy your job. You know, it can be the most monotonous job in the world. But if the people around you are great, then you do enjoy your job, don't you?
I think a lot of people probably stay and don't quite quit a lot longer than they would if they've got the right people.
Yeah.
But I see that as an opportunity as an employer, because if you can spot the signs earlier and you can see there's this glimmers of great culture, it's just maybe some of the, I don't know, the requirements of the job and maybe the processes that you've actually got in place that are making people go more down the route of quiet quitting.
Yeah.
Then if you can spot those signs early and look at those pockets of sunshine of culture and the people that work together well, and you have actually encouraged collaborative working and those sorts of things. I think if you can spot that early, then you can use that, can't you? Because it's not all going to be bad. But what's interesting about some of this research is that it's a lot of people are not quite quitting because they're disconnecting from the organization. No. They're actually quite quitting because they're managing their own mental health.
Well, exactly, yeah. And I think when I've been reading things, I think in some respects, the term quiet quitting isn't kind of the right way to word it, because people are quitting. So some people will be quietly quitting because they feel disconnected. They're just not liking their job anymore. Whereas the people who are doing it for their mental health, they're not quitting. They're just doing
managing it.
To benefit themselves. And they're going, right, okay, things are getting out of control here. I'm going to make sure, rather than working, especially people who work from home, I can imagine it's more tempting to carry on after your contracted working hours. You can just be like, right, I start work at 9, I finish work at 5, and then I'm going to shut my laptop, and that's it.
And sometimes that's all you can do, isn't it? I think if we talk to people that we do exec coaching with, or managers we work with, you know, and they've got a tendency to be an overworker, and we know from what we know about human behavior, some people are naturally just going to do that. They have to go above and beyond.
Yes.
I'm like that. I know I'm like that. I will always put probably too much in compared to other people in certain situations. And I don't do it for any other reason. I do it because that's just who I am. I can't help it, you know, and I've got to be really conscious of that. And some people find ways to manage it, like you say. So they'll say, well, if I put a rule in that I don't have to answer any emails after 6, or I don't go on my emails, if I stop coming in a little bit earlier at work, you know, I won't pick up those extra emails and do the work that everyone else could do. You know, it's little things that you think. And then actually another thing that we have to point out here is sometimes it's your family or your external things that are giving you the cause for quiet quitting, because you know we've all been there. And actually I was laughing about this the other day, about the look you get from your partner when you're on your laptop at night. So like if you're on your phone and you're checking, and they know you're checking emails or whatever, and they have kind of got that mindset where they can switch off, they look at you as if you're crazy. And also they say, or do you care more about that than you do us in the house? And you think, well, no, it's not that. It's just that I am naturally a busy-minded person, and I like to know what's going on tomorrow, because I don't always see reading an email as stress for the next day. No. Sometimes I'll read it and go, right, I'm really excited about, I'm going to work on that tomorrow. Whereas if I'm in the wrong mindset, or I feel like I'm not getting things back, or we're in a threat state environment, obviously I'm going to think, oh my God, I'm so worried about this thing. So I think it's down to you, isn't it? About how you...
Oh, definitely,
And you can choose to tap into the work or tap out. But it's down to how you manage things. And I think if you think about how we're built as humans, I think I can kind of look at my parents and probably my grandparents and think, would they have ever done this? I think my granddad, because he was just like me, like to say his piece. I think I could see him doing some sort of form of work to rule if he was annoyed. But from a quiet quitting perspective, probably not, because I think he would have gone, I need to suck it up because that's just how it is.
Yeah.
Or he would have made a very quick decision. That's not what I'm doing. I'm moving on, because he had a very distinct, but then I wouldn't have had the choice then.
Well, no, yeah.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Whereas, new generations are looking at things thinking, I have a deeper understanding of my mental health now, which I personally think is good. Some people like to say it's that kind of snowflake scenario of, well, it's a bit of hard work. And I think there's a fine line. I do genuinely think that. But, millennials, Gen Zs, the newer generations come through, they're realizing that overworking doesn't necessarily get you things.
No.
And a lot of them state that actually they don't really care that much about the company in some instances, especially early in their career. They're saying, hey, listen, this is part of my CV. So I'm just going to here to make the best of what I can. And I'm going to move on to this bigger thing because I want to go to a big organization where I can really connect with the fact that they're giving back to the environment and all those big things that seem to be really important to those generations. I think Gen Zs and, people in that kind of space, they want to see the companies making a difference more, don't they? So they're more likely to even go into this quiet quitting scenario, not even based on their own experience, but maybe disconnect from the value in the cultures and what the company gives back sometimes.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of mention of Gen Z in all of these articles, and it is kind of focused around them, like saying, Gen Z are more likely to quiet quit. I think it's going back to when you mentioned your granddad. Obviously, back in the day, we didn't have access to mobile phones, so you didn't have your work emails on your phone.
No,
you didn't have a laptop to take home, so you couldn't check
Them were the
your
days.
emails. Whereas now you do. So it becomes a choice, more of a choice to whether you want to check your emails when you get home. And so then there's that thing around, oh, well, people who won't check their emails when they get home from work, I don't know, are they not putting in as much effort?
Do they not care?
Do they not care about it? And that's not necessarily the case.
No, God, no.
It's just they're making a choice, but I don't think they should be made to feel guilty about that.
No.
I think they're just picking a kind of way of life.
Yeah, it's just the way they do things, the way they process things. And I think that's important. I think one of the things that we probably should point out here is we're going to look at it from two angles to kind of wrap it up in some sort of form today. Is like, if you feel this in your organization, I deeply feel you can kind of almost feel this bubbling, this quiet quitting, or you can feel it full flow depending on what situation, because sometimes it might be because of a big strategic decision's been made and you feel it, everyone's just gone, right, screw this, this is what I'm going to do, and it does feel like industrial action in some sense. For some people it's looking for the early signs, isn't it, in humans, because the reality is, like you said, there's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 reasons why someone does that. It's not always linked to the company's outputs and inputs. Sometimes it's the home life, sometimes it's mental health. There's a million different reasons. So the main thing is, if you feel it, can you go and have a conversation with that person? And I think for a lot of employers, they feel things bubbling from a cultural perspective, but don't do anything about it. Now, we talk a lot about culture. Culture is everything, really. I think if the culture is good, you're less likely to have quiet quitting going on.
Definitely.
You're still going to get it, but there's going to be a different element to it. So I think the first thing you need to think about is, are you creating open platforms for people to come and have conversations? If you're doing that, if you're having those regular one-to-ones, if you're having the coffee chats, and a lot of companies have reported that those have kind of disappeared in a way since COVID.
Yeah, especially companies that have gone remote or hybrid.
Yeah, because, they're saying, no, well, but we do catch up, but it doesn't feel like quality catch up, because there's nothing better than eye-to-eye contact in a lot of, instances, and a coffee and a shared laugh, and it's not always as organic. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. You can still make it happen. But so I think that as an employer, understanding your culture, that's got to be the way to avoid this happening, I think. Secondly, it's probably making sure that workloads are realistic.
Yes.
Because for me, a lot of the time we are putting a lot of pressure on people to say, this is what we expect. And people who will overwork. People who get overwhelmed will get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
There's got to be a balance, hasn't there?
Yeah, definitely. And I think organizations, they've particularly those in leadership positions, do have a big role to play. So they need to encourage their employees to clock off at the right time, to start at the right time. and not make it feel like they have to. So if they do want to carry on working half an hour after the finish time, they can. That's their choice. But they shouldn't feel like they're forced into it. And if you notice there are employees who are still working an hour, 2 hours after the finish time, you need to ask them why. Is it because they've just got too much to do and they can't handle the workload? Is it because there's someone like you who they can't switch off and they've just got so many ideas going on? So they need to understand the reasons why.
And give them space somewhere else, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's not always doable. But yeah, I think there's loads of reasons. I think the other thing to kind of point out is that, you know, there is a time and a place for pay setting. You know, that there are situations in a business where you do have to expect a little bit more, you know, especially if you're in a growing business, you know, and not everyone's built for that.
No.
So the reality is that employers probably need to spot early whether or not that person is someone that, you know, all the studies we're reading at the minute are about, you know, companies that classify themselves as fast moving or innovative. Their attrition rates are not as good because people tend to tap out a bit earlier. So you've got to ask yourself, as from an employer's perspective, in that first 90 days, you know, what sort of are you seeing? Do you feel like if this is the pace of the business, but trying to do the right things, but this person's still struggling, you know, is it the right fit? And then from the person going into the business, you've got to be realistic about what your expectations, haven't you? And say, you know, I like the idea of working here, which is what it is in a lot of cases with innovative companies. But actually, you know, the pace is too much. The other thing that I made a note of here was that, you know, people sometimes feel guilty for taking leave because their employees are actually sort of saying to them, oh, well, we're really going to struggle. I was working with some solicitors recently who said, you know, if someone's off, we've got to make up the money. You know, we don't get like a reduction in our budgets. We still have to hit those hours, you know. And, you know, so allowing, I think good employers go, right, let's have a look at the year in advance and try and like even it all out so people are taking their leave. And if you have got an overworker, even if they won't take a week's leave, right, well, we're going to arrange for you to have a couple of long weekends and you need to, you know, decompress, because I know you're on that project and I really appreciate you putting the work in, but the reality is I still know that you're going to need a break, you know. I think boundaries are important. So both from an employee perspective and the employer, I think if you're having those coffee chats, knowing what fits for that individual, you know, someone like me, I'm going to be like, this is all right, but this is one small thing that really bothers me and I won't do that. Whereas other people would be like, no, like I physically can't turn my brain off after 6 o'clock. So if I do that, that's going to make me, I'm not going to do the right things. I'm not going to make great decisions. And actually I am going to be more likely to feel really passive aggressive sometimes about some of this work, let's be honest. So I think the working culture, open communication, and I think looking for early signs of people struggling and being able to feel confident in going and approaching those conversations sometimes. And I think if you know your people, and we always say this is so important, isn't it? You've got to get to know your people. If you know your people, you can see these things come in for sure, can't you? And if you're an individual, we've got to think about, right, okay, so if you're listening to this right now and it's you, so it's not the organization, because we know what organizations can do. You know, you've got to be responsible for your boundaries. So have you had the conversation about those boundaries? So whether it is the working relevance of what you can do, your timescales, what your purpose is, and actually what you disconnect with, can you make your peace with it or not? Are you remaining professional? Because that's a big thing for me. You know, you're only as good as your last day is what my granddad used to say to me. And I think that's important, because there's a reason that that's important. If you're going to move on at some point, because there is a fine line. Are you going to quit or not? So if you decide you're going to move on, you've got to consider that you might need a job change, in which case, why put these people that you're working with through the hardship and actually create a bad environment for other people where actually they might be okay with, they might not be, but they might be okay with it. So remaining professional is really important. So even if it means that, you know, sometimes you've got to make that decision, you've got to move on. And I think then that then allows you to then reconnect with your purpose. So what is it about that job that's infuriating you, or that environment? Reconnect with it and find something that sits better. But yeah, professionalism is massive. And the other thing is just be wary of some of the negative consequences. You know, I'm not saying you shouldn't say things, but be careful how you put those things across. And actually think about, you know, the potential of how it'll affect others around you as well. So like you might pull out of that team a little bit, but you can see the people you really enjoy and work with. Like they're actually really struggling. And do you want that for them? So for me, like, there's two sides to the coin there, isn't there? So great chat. We could probably do more on this.
Keep going for ages, can't
we? But really appreciate you coming in. I feel like I grabbed you and didn't let you go, but I've really enjoyed the chat. So yeah, thanks thanks to all you guys for listening. Thanks for Lydia for joining us. That's it for now. We will see you again on another T2 Hubcast. Bye for now.